Nigerians are still worried that the way the Senate handled proposals on real-time electronic transmission of election results could hurt the credibility of the 2027 elections and shake public trust and democracy. Speaking with correspondent Soibi Oruari of Pohaka-based lawyer Uche Olemune described the decision of the Senate as unfortunate, noting that lawmakers failed to seize a critical opportunity to strengthen transparency and credibility in the nation's electoral system. Take a listen.
Even when that matter came up in court, the question now was whether the language of the law was compulsory, whether it was necessarily compulsory for INEC to transmit results via electronic means. One had thought if we have a Nigerian Senate that is serious about carrying out electoral reforms and deepening democracy, what they would have done now is state it in an unmistakable terms. Of course, the language of law now should have been sharp. All of a sudden, you just heard them that they rejected it. So it means now we are going back to the old ways of doing things.
Olewune lamented that the refusal to make electronic transmission of results mandatory signals a setback for democratic reforms in the country, warning that such actions will further erode public confidence in the electoral process.
They talk as if they are God. Somebody will tell you that he's coming to take over. And you begin to ask yourself, this person, is he aware that his fate is dependent on the outcome of the votes that they cast by the electorate? They knew ab initio that they are going to reject electronic transmission of votes. And with that, honestly speaking, for me, it's bye-bye to democracy. What is wrong in transmitting that result electronically? We heaven fall if that result is transmitted immediately. In the words of Yakubu, it's every time.
He said he wouldn't be surprised if President Bola Tinubu signs into law the proposed electoral reforms without the provision for mandatory electronic transmission of election results.
Will it be surprised if the president assents to it? I expect Nigerians to say no to this. This is what we want. After all, this is all about the people, not about the few politicians. We want to deepen democracy, yes, and the only way to deepen it as it is today in Nigeria is let the votes count. And if you are talking about the votes counting, the only way you can say yes through this electronic transmission of results in wait time. 85%, if not 90% of the National Assembly people, if you transmit that result electronically, none of them will be elected.
Also, human rights lawyer Courage Insirumovu believes that the 2027 general elections may be compromised if the Electoral Act is not amended to limit the powers of INEC in determining the mode of result transmission.
This section of the Electoral Act is not amended, and INEC is allowed to decide how results should be transferred or transmitted, then the election in 2027 is rigged already. So the people of Nigeria should not sit back. We have time. We should all come out and insist on the amendment of the Electoral Act for the results to be transmitted.
Insirumovu insists that Nigerians must rise to demand the inclusion of compulsory electronic transmission of election results, stressing that it remains a critical safeguard for free, fair, and credible elections in the country.
This is one thing we should fight for. If there is nothing we have ever fought for, this is a cause worth fighting. And until that transmission is done and the INEC server has integrity, we will never get our votes to count. If we want our votes to count, then we must insist on the amendment of the Electoral Act to the extent that the transmission of results from the polling unit to the IRF server is mandatory.
Adding to the criticism is the executive director of Yaga Africa, Samson Yetodo, who described the Senate's move as really unfortunate and a dark day for legislative governance in Nigeria. In a statement, Itodo argued that unpopular and corrupt politicians fear accountability. He said the action of the lawmakers is highly condemnable and a betrayal of the trust Nigerians place on them. On their part, some political parties warned that the Senate's handling of proposals on real-time electronic transmission of election results could weaken public trust in Nigeria's democracy. In a statement jointly signed by a spokesperson of the PDP, ADC and NNPP, the opposition parties accused the APC-led Senate of intentionally protecting loopholes to aid future electoral manipulation. However, the Senate Minority Caucus has a different view. In the press briefing on Thursday, former Senate Minority Leader Senator Inaya Abaribe clarified that the Senate did not actually reject electronic transmission before passing the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, contrary to widespread media reports. Mr. Abaribe also said while some parties and civil society groups see the Senate's action as a step back for transparency, the lawmakers maintain that electronic transmission of election results has not been removed, and the process remains legally protected. He outlined the legislative process that led to the decision, beginning with the Joint Committee of the Senate and the House of Representatives on electoral matters. Also, a coalition of civil society organizations has dismissed reports that the Senate rejected electronic transmission of election results, describing such narratives as deliberately crafted to misinform the public. In a statement issued on Thursday, the coalition of civil society groups of democratic accountability and electoral integrity said the Senate neither voted against nor outlawed electronic transmission of results during its deliberations on the amendment of the Electoral Act. It said what transpired in the Senate was a legislative and procedural clarification rather than a reversal of democratic gains. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives on Thursday constituted a bipartisan conference committee on the Electoral Act Amendment Bill to harmonize differences between versions passed by both chambers of the National Assembly. The development was disclosed in a statement signed by spokesman of the House of Representatives, Akin Rotimi Jr. The chairman of the committee is Adebayo Balogun. Other members are Fred Agbedi, Sado Soli, Amadu Jaha, Edumo Anwar, Saidu Abdullahi, and Dr. Zainab Kimba. Now, let's tell you INEC has registered 2 additional political parties, the Democratic Leadership Alliance, DLA, and the Nigeria Democratic Congress, NDC, increasing the number of parties in the country to 21. The chairman of the commission, Professor Joash Hamupitan, announced this while addressing stakeholders during its first regular consultative meeting with political parties on Thursday. The commission expressed concern over the continued registration and retention of political parties plagued by recurring leadership conflicts, warning that persistent internal crisis pose a danger to constitutional order. In the meantime, the Wike-backed faction of the PDP today attended INEC quarterly consultative meeting with political parties in Abuja. The faction was led to the meeting by its national chairman, Abdul Rahman Mohammed, and national secretary, Samuel Ayamu.